Welcome to today's Army Current Operations Engagement Tour press conference. This is part of our continuing effort to have senior leaders meet with the media to discuss the deployment experiences and lessons learned. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, but first let me just go over a couple of ground rules with you real quick. Today's discussion will be on the record. We ask that you keep questions within the subject of the first SVAB's deployment and lessons learned. We will have approximately 30 minutes for questions, so if you would, please state your name and your affiliation and limit yourself, if possible, to one question. But if time allows, we will continue to field questions until we're out of time. Your moderator for today's press conference is Colonel Kathleen Turner. She's the Director for Army Public Affairs Media Relations Division. We'll get started in just a few moments. In the meantime, we're passing out fact sheets, and we're also passing out bios of the team that's going to be up here talking to you. Thank you.
So you're next to the boss. Awesome.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming this morning. I know Cheryl talked to you about just to review the ground rules and explain how much time we got today. So today, everything is on the record. We've got about 30 minutes for our press brief. Once introductions are complete by Brigadier General Jackson, we'll start taking questions. And so I ask, once I call on you to identify yourself and your outlet, just because the folks from the first SVAB aren't familiar with all of you, so I just want to make sure they know who they're talking to. Today's host is the first SVAB Commander, Brigadier General Scott Jackson. From February to November 2018, the 1st Security Force Assistance Brigade deployed in support of the NATO Resolute Support Mission and U.S. Forces Afghanistan. The 1st SVAB is stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia. Ladies and gentlemen, I turn it over to Brigadier General Scott Jackson. Sir?
Thank you, Colonel Turner. Good morning. I'm Brigadier General Scott Jackson, the commander of the 1st Security Force Assistance Brigade, stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia. My team and I appreciate the chance to talk about our 9-month deployment to Afghanistan that occurred last year. Before I continue, though, I'd like to introduce my team that's with me here today. I wish, honestly, I could bring in the entire brigade, because they are all exceptional soldiers and advisors and have a great story to tell you. Instead, I've brought a small but excellent sample of the talent and expertise found in our organization. To my left is Lieutenant Colonel Brian Ducote. He's our 1st Battalion Commander in Afghanistan and soon to be the brigade's new Deputy Commander. Brian has great experience advising and partnering with Afghan Army brigades while guiding and leading a number of advising teams throughout Train Advise Assist Command East. Major Kyle Packard, our strategic planner, was instrumental in helping to develop our brigade from its inception. He helped make the plans that allowed us to rapidly recruit, train, and then employ our advisors for the most impact in Afghanistan. And while deployed, he discovered economies of scale, which increased our advising capacity and helped us punch way above our weight. Captain Gerard Spinney leads a combat advisor team which partnered with an Afghan infantry battalion in northern Kandahar province. He and his team did an outstanding job advising at the lowest tactical level, fully implementing the SVAB purpose. Last, but certainly not least, is Sergeant First Class Sarah Lira. She represents an exceptionally talented group of female soldiers who volunteered to serve as advisors. Sergeant First Class Lira is an ammunition specialist who worked on a logistics advising team in TAC East and helped her Afghan partners properly store and, when necessary, dispose of dangerous explosives. I served in Task Force Southeast, advising the Afghan Army 203rd Corps commander and his staff. You may have noticed I mentioned 3 of the regional commands in Afghanistan, but I'd like to emphasize that 1st SVAB's 58 advisory teams served in every Train Advise Assist command in Afghanistan. Our 800-soldier organization partnered with more than 30 Afghan battalions, 15 brigades, multiple regional training centers, a Corps headquarters, and a Capital Division headquarters. That's nearly half of the Afghan National Army. I believe we can only accomplish our mission and reach these milestones and validate the effectiveness of an SVAB because the Army got it right. I said this in June when I spoke to you from Afghanistan, and the final months of our deployment reinforced my belief. The Army got it right. The Army issued us the right equipment, provided us the right training to be successful. But most importantly, we selected the right people for this mission. In Afghanistan, we learned several key lessons, but none more important than that one. The key to our success is the talented, adaptable, and experienced volunteers who serve in this brigade. We also learned a number of lessons about the value of an SFAB and how to best employ our teams. We learned that our small advising teams are very powerful and have far more advising capacity than we thought. They can and did expand the number of Afghan units they were advising through a combination of persistent and periodic advising. As our Afghan partners began to understand the value of first SFAB advisors, they asked us for more. So our teams partnered with more and more Afghan units as the deployment progressed. We learned that we were most effective when we maintained a persistent presence with our partner. Units with persistent partners made more progress in planning and conducting offensive operations and in integrating organic Afghan enablers like field artillery and Air Force and the Afghan Air Force than unpersistent partnered units. Finally, we captured these lessons learned and passed them to the newly formed Security Force Assistance Command and our brothers and sisters in 2nd SFAB. I'm particularly proud of our soldiers who, despite having just returned from a deployment, traveled to Fort Polk and the Joint Readiness Training Center for several weeks last January to support 2nd Brigade's mission training exercise. While I can't discuss the current situation in Afghanistan, I'm very proud of what 2nd SFAB is doing, and I wish them the very best as they continue working with their Afghan partners in pursuit of peace. And before I finish, I want to address what we're doing now and what's next for the 1st SFAB. Since coming home in November, we, like most Army units after deployment, have been repairing equipment and replacing a number of our teammates. We are also conducting individual and small unit training to prepare for our next mission. While we are preparing and planning to provide the Army a ready unit later this year, we do not have deployment orders at this time. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'll close by saying how incredibly proud I am of the soldiers of the 1st SFAB. I'm truly honored to serve amongst them. They have exceeded all expectations, and I can't wait to see what amazing things they will do next. And with that, we are happy to take all of your questions.
Okay, so we'll open it up to questions. Rita?
Hi, Scott. Just another quick question on so the future plans of the brigade, because the new the new national security policy talks about Russia and China. Did you have to adjust some of the training to deal with some of those types of threats as you prepare to go to other places in Europe and Africa?
Yeah. Well, the shift from conflict to competition is what you're really referring to. And so there are some adjustments necessary. I mean, that type of environment that we would operate in is different than a conflict zone. Authorities are different, and relationships are different. So we're adjusting the way we integrate within a non-military environment as part of our training plan. Is probably the biggest change we'll make. Expanding out our understanding of how the State Department works and how other interagency parts of the government work so we can work as part of a better team.
Wes?
Hi, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about Wes Morgan with Politico. We met in Fort Polk.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the way that the teams were used in different parts of the country varied. How the different TACs and the different Afghan National Army Corps, the different things that they wanted out of different teams depending on different conditions.
Yeah, great question, Wes. And I'll ask Brian to kind of talk about his experiences in TAC East, because he had inside one group of provinces, he had multiple different approaches that would probably be very illustrative.
Yes, sir. So looking at the system we call TAC East and where's the potential exist in that system, we kind of saw that the brigade level is really where a lot of the decisions were made. And so what we did was we partnered at that level, usually me as an entry force, the initial relationship, establish a relationship, build confidence in that relationship, reinforce that relationship. But then we also found is that we have the right people in this formation, and they're so talented that I could oftentimes hand that off to a very experienced key and developmental complete captain in Sergeant First Class, who then would maintain that relationship as I go build other ones, and then come back when I needed to as necessary. But that's the power of this force structure. We can do that where they maintain a relationship, and when they need assistance, they call higher headquarters. We're in the same patch, mutual understanding, the same language, the same understanding of some of the challenges that advisor faces. And I would come in and we'd address things and to keep things moving, or honestly to bring them to the next level. So extremely powerful in that regard because of the right people in the formation. So we did that, and then we were able to partner with, initially started with 2 and went up to 6 brigades, where we had all of them operating simultaneously. By the time elections came around, all of them were able to be operating in the environment and doing their security tasks in order to make sure we had successful elections. It's really humbling to see because of the people we have.
Yeah, that's kind of what, Wes, I would amplify that by saying, that's how we say we punch way above our weight class, because you can take a captain and pair them with a foreign partner force that may have a one-star general in charge or a full colonel potentially, because of that, that sustaining relationship through the captain on a day-to-day basis, that persistent relationship, energized and sometimes amplified by his presence and his expertise. And so, but it all comes back to, as Brian said, it's the people we hired from the first day.
And you mentioned the importance of persistent engagement. Can you talk about what's the spectrum in terms of, maybe on the one end you had advisor teams that just stuck with one unit for the whole time versus advisor teams that kind of, as you were saying, bounced around as the needs changed?
Well, sure, I'll tell you that the relationships are so authentic and genuine that our advisors are able to build that they could stick with them, and we'd come back and they had that relationship, but we generated tremendous offensive maneuver among the Afghans just because of that relationship. So it depended on where the Afghan partner was at. So if they needed more touch points, let's say, then we put them out there for several weeks or a week or throughout a month or maybe every other month, just depending on what we assessed the need was, so we could fully maximize the potential within the formation. And the greatest thing about that is that we were able to operate at such distances among all those units because of the phenomenal equipment that we did have, that we were issued, that the Army gave us. We got it right, especially with people and the equipment. The equipment was able to, especially the communication systems, we were able to communicate at such a distance and so rapidly that we were able to understand each of the individual units and what they needed, so that we can therefore adjust our advising plan accordingly.
Okay, next question.
Captain, Sergeant, could you possibly tell us, some of your experiences on the ground? How were the units that you worked with? How were they chosen? How accepting were they? What is left to be learned by them after 17 years of war? And Sergeant Lear, could you talk about, in particular, your work with trying to get at the IEDs?
Yes, I can take that, sir. So, I was in Tarankot, Ruzgan Province. My team, we advised a Kandak level, so a battalion level infantry unit. We were co-located on the same airfield, so a little differing from Colonel Ducote. Our persistent advising was nearly every day. We could drive over there, sit down with them. What we did find, and I'd say our biggest takeaway, is that we could enable tactical success without accompanying them. So we didn't conduct any operations with them. We worked their systems, their processes. It was pretty heavy on logistics at times. One of the things that we saw when we first got there at a Kandak level was their brigade and corps, they have systems, to get supplies down. They have methods of resupplying them with different means. They didn't know the systems. And so that's something that we could affect. We learned the systems. We used the advisor network, meaning I could talk to my boss, similar to Colonel Ducote, who's advising at that next higher level, and kind of connect that link from the lower levels to the higher levels. And they improved with the systems and processes, which later proved tactical successes without us actually being on the ground fighting with them.
Sergeant?
Good morning. I'm Sergeant Lear. I was part of a logistics advisories team. I was in TAC East at Tactical Base Ganberry. I was part of a 4-man team that advised both at the Corps level and the FSD level. So what assisted us in our mission was that we had multiple advisors at different echelons to help with the logistics process. So in order for me to be able to work the ammo portion, well, I know General Jackson just touched on it, that I helped demilitarize a number of ammunitions and explosives. So I had myself at the FSD level. I had to also advise at the Corps level, which was their part of their proven authority. And then I had other advisors that dealt directly with the Corps commander, and then you had U.S. advisors at the CSTICA level and the MOD level. So when we're able to have that multiple advisors be able to communicate with each other and ensure that the processes are being met and being able to assist those our Afghan partners, it was easy for us to make sure that we were able to assist them in the way that they needed. When you talk about logistics, there's a lot of growing pains, but I would definitely say that from the start that when we first arrived in Afghanistan to the part where we departed, there were there were a lot of lessons learned. And you could definitely see the willingness of our Afghan partners that they're wanting to get better.
Courtney Cuby with NBC News. Sorry, I'm in like a bad spot
No worries.
here. I'm in your blind spot.
I don't have to answer the question now, I guess.
Yeah. Actually, the question is for you, General Jackson. You mentioned that you don't have any new deployment orders. Is the assumption that you guys will do the next rotation, or that there'll be a third SFAB that will be stood up in time to do the next rotation? Do you have any idea of a timeline? I know that obviously if it's not you guys, that's a weird question. But is there any idea of a timeline for when the next SFAB will go, or do you see there being another gap in the deployments? Because you specifically mentioned that the consistent presence and the consistent mentoring is what was effective on your deployment.
Yeah, Courtney, I appreciate the question. I can't really get into the specifics. Thanks. The specifics of timing, but I will tell you that there is another SFAB preparing to deploy as well and going through its build just like we did, and there should not be an SFAB lapse between the two formations.
So the assumption is that the second one is there now, and the SFAB 3 will go, and then will you guys do another rotation, SFAB 1? Is that how this is going to go? Is your understanding?
Well, there's the Army's going to build a total of 5 active component SFABs plus 1 in the National Guard. So we'll see how the sequencing flows out across that entire fourth generation process. But I think in the future, as subsequent SFABs come online, it creates a huge capacity for the rest of the combatant commands around the world. So I would be confident and say that there's assessments ongoing to see where else you could apply SFABs out besides Afghanistan.
Lucas?
Tomlinson, Fox News. Between the U.S. Army, the U.S. military, and your Afghan partners, you've killed a lot of Taliban in the last 17 years, yet the war continues and there seems to be no end in sight despite peace talks taking place. My question is, do you see an end to this war?
So I'll start. I think your assertion that there's no end in sight is your assertion, first off. And we've been out of Afghanistan now for almost 5 months, so you minute you're 2 weeks out of Afghanistan, you're dated. So please keep that in context with what I'm about to say. But I can tell you, in the 9 months we were there, excuse me, from February to November of 2018, you saw progress. You saw shifts in the dynamic, the social dynamic, right? For the first time, you saw a ceasefire, a bilateral ceasefire. And I will share with you that from observations on the ground, I mean that was a cataclysmic shift in the social dynamic of Afghanistan. When you saw the infamous selfies of ice cream in Gardez. I was stationed outside of Gardez, and we literally had pictures of Taliban fighters who hadn't returned to their families in a decade, in some cases, based on how old they were. Rejoined with their families, taking pictures alongside their clanmates. Afghan soldiers standing right next to Taliban fighters, snapping selfies and posting them on Instagram. That was huge. That was huge, and I think it was. I think it's my personal opinion at the time. I was like, that was the first sign that socially we were trending upwards and people wanted peace. Nobody wants 17 plus years of war. They're tired socially, and so I think that's. So when you say there's no end in sight, I totally disagree with you.
Did you or your Afghan partners communicate with some of those Taliban fighters or perhaps the commanders during that time? So
some of our Afghan partners, at least in Southeast, yes, there was communication during the ceasefire period at the lower tactical level, and there was dialogue ongoing at the time as well.
There was a lot of reports that some of the lower level Taliban fighters do want peace. It's the higher ups, perhaps next door in Pakistan, that don't. Is that what you experienced?
In our time period there, I would agree with that.
Travis Tritton, Bloomberg. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. So we've been working with the Afghan security forces since I think early in the war. It's a long-term effort, very long-term effort. So I'm wondering if you could be more specific and drill down a little bit on what you see as the lasting security gains that you made while you were there.
Okay. Brian, talk to some of yours.
Yes, sir. We saw enormous offensive maneuver generated, not just at the brigade level, as they kind of got their feet underneath them and kind of saw what we can do as advisors. They weren't over-dependent. They were able to execute offensive operations themselves, but it was a huge confidence builder when we were sometimes just present. Even if we didn't support them one bit, just us being there gave them the confidence to execute on independent offensive operations. Just us there. And what we saw was that expanded from the brigade level. Then all of a sudden, Kandak battalion level commanders were also generating offensive maneuver, whether we were there or not. And that's really humbling to watch, because we're partners. And they believe in themselves. The Afghan army has tremendous freedom of maneuver and access to areas where they want to go. If they put their mind to it and they say, okay, we're going to move into this area to clear it. So they know that. They absolutely know that. And they believe in this peace process, and they believe that their role is to continually buy time, essentially, and apply pressure for the political resolution. And they're good at it, and they can do it. Would they, given the choice, would they want advisors with them? Absolutely. Why not? But let there be no mistake, the Afghans are in lead, and the Afghans can do this.
Was there an expansion of territory during that
absolutely.
time? Can we quantify it with numbers? Is there some way to show the progress besides anecdotally?
Well, that's right. Yeah, exactly. All we could offer is anecdotal my experience, but I can tell you that the Afghans, before we even arrived, had definitely expanded what I would call security bubble around places in Logman. They definitely did that when we were there around Kunar, and they definitely did it in Kapisa. So there's all sorts of provinces where they expanded their footprint and their influence. And you know what? The people absolutely support their security forces. That's one thing that was really heartening to see, how much the people of Afghanistan want their security forces to do just that. So, and they're doing it.
Well, Ryan, and then we'll move over to you, Tom.
Hi, thank you. Ryan Brown with CNN. Kind of a two-part question. The first one, if you could talk a little bit about security with regards to advising the kind of green on blue threat, and how that kind of transitioned, the steps you had to take to deal with that threat. And then additionally, we've heard a lot about the challenges with mentoring the ANA, particularly Officer Corps and the NCO Corps. It's not a force that has historically respected the NCO Corps. So can you talk a little bit about how, do you see a difference between younger officers who've come in recently through the academy program at Karga or other places versus some of the old guard that have kind of come in from the older system? Do you see the younger officers more effective?
Yeah. Ryan, thanks for that. Those are some great questions, and just like in June, you have a multi-part question. So I'll address the insider threat green on blue piece up front, and then I'd ask Gerard to kind of talk about the value of our presence at the battalion level and what that means for culture. So obviously, the brigade suffered 2 traumatic losses while we were over there. Corporal Joseph Maciel was killed in July, and then Command Sergeant Major Timothy Bullard in September, both as a result of insider threat attacks. Obviously, their loss is tragic for us internally, and we deal with it every single day. And our sympathies go to the Maciel family and to Amy Bullard and the rest of the Bullard clan throughout West Virginia. And we think about them. We think about them daily. But from an organizational perspective, it was something we knew was possible going into it, and we trained for it. We had procedures in place. We had additional security that came along with the SFAB. As you know, the SFAB was augmented with additional security forces for our own personal point protection. And so, we took the appropriate measures to going into this mission. So, and in both those incidences, without going into the details of the attack, because, we still have that to the family, we did the right things. The training worked, and we had to deal with the situation. On the backside of it, though, I would share with you is that, although the insider threat had a potential to derail missions, right? And I think the Taliban actually counted on that. What they found in the end was that it didn't derail the mission. And despite a brief pause, maybe, as we reassessed what happened and what we needed to do, both on the Afghan side and the American side, in the end, our relationship was stronger. There was a tragic degree of responsibility and sympathy that came out of both those attacks that, in both cases, our relationship with our partner was stronger and the security situation was better for our advisors and allowed us to do our job more effectively. So the Afghans owned it. They took responsibility for fixing it. And most importantly, our team, did our part of looking at the situation, and then we got right back in the saddle, and to best honor the memories of what Maciel and Bullard wanted to do. Bullard and Maciel were there to serve. That was the mission, right? And by keeping and continuing the mission after this event was the best thing we could do for Tim Bullard and Joseph Maciel.
Can I just follow up on that, sir?
Yeah.
Did you have to bring in more resources for more guardian angels or something like that? Was that part of it?
Ryan, I'd rather not get into the details of what we did for corrective action, because whatever we did for corrective action then is still being carried forward now. So to protect 2nd Brigade. But Gerard, I'd like to talk to you about kind of your impact at the personal level, please.
Right. So I was stationed at Tarancot. That's where Corporal Maciel died. He was a member of our team, beloved, respected soldier on our team, securing us. So, I mean, his sacrifice will never be forgot. But we still had to continue advising afterwards. So that day when it happened, my partner, the Candet commander, although it wasn't one of his soldiers, he wanted to come see me. You know, he was very adamant coming to see me. He sat down and he was angry. He was embarrassed, and he was determined to rid the unit of anything like this. And it was sincere. I truly believe that. I mean, during the deployment, I mean, he lost many soldiers. You know, I had to sit with him and almost echo, you know, the same sympathies. And I think our relationship got stronger because you have to be there with them, good times, bad times, successes and failures. I mean, that's how you build trust. That's how you show you care. And he was there for us that day. And our relationship survived. And I'd say from that point on, he wanted to make us feel safer. Like I said, I mean, he was angry. He had nothing to do with it, but he was angry. And so from that point on, we saw differences in security, and I'm not going to get into any details, but they took care of us because they wanted us there. And they didn't want us to feel threatened by any of his soldiers.
So I know we got a second part to Ryan's question, and then we'll go one more over to this side with Todd, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
You want to address that?
I'll just say for that particular part, just want to highlight how much our partners genuinely and authentically cared for our protection. Every single mission that we went on, coming in at all hours of the night, we were personally met by the brigade commander, one-star generals. I remember one time, 3 o'clock in the morning, wanted to have tea. I have tea, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to go to sleep, but it was worth it. He's so happy to see us and he was so concerned with our force protection. Personally met us and helped us make sure the areas that we were going to be were safe, and we felt comfortable with the security procedures, and that we were nested. It was humbling to watch that and be a part of that. So just wanted to highlight that for our partners, just how authentically they cared for our force protection and how hard they worked for it.
Ryan, I'll service your question in 30 seconds on the second part, I promise. So NCO officer relationship, culture change, I mean, that is, and I was happy you asked that question, because that is the output, the outcome of persistent presence and advising. Our example, their example, is what changes cultures. And you know, when you look at, you know, folks like Sergeant First Class Lyra down on the end of the table, I mean, her authority through her expertise and her professional competence, you know, demonstrates, you know, the need of an NCO, and that changes behavior in the Afghan Army. You know, Gerard's actions as a young captain and his relationship with his battalion commander and with me on the ground, when they see how he interacts with me, that's not typical in most developing armies. We're very hierarchical. So they see positive examples and they make changes accordingly. Some of our best, you know, Afghan Candat commanders were ones who were young and had been exposed on a daily basis throughout their career to young American officers and NCOs. And so you saw a generational change occurring to get, you know, a more 21st century military. Sorry about that.
So over time will be the last question.
South Army time. Colonel, you mentioned some things about equipment, specific to comms. Could you speak to what was different about the table of equipment you brought over this time versus a standard BCG deployment, and kind of what at different levels was enabling, I guess?
I want to get into specifics in terms of the types of equipment, again, and for force protection reasons, but I'll tell you that the capabilities and the redundancy really protected the force. Because, again, these teams are operating at distance in austere environments. In some cases without electricity, to be able to partner the forces and just focus on that mission. That's the type of people we have in this formation. So with that, we need the right equipment to be able to extend the trust that we give to them, the trust that we extend to them. We want that to be manifested through the right equipment, communications specifically. And we have it, from medical equipment to communications equipment to vehicles. We have that type of equipment because the Army got it right in what they gave us. And we're able to do that mission at distance.
Okay. Sir, we'll refer you to close us out.
Well, again, I'll start where I started at. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm a little bit biased, but I think our brigade's got a great story based on some great soldiers. And any opportunity we get a chance to communicate that story to the American public, we appreciate it. And you're a vital part of that. So I think we showed throughout our deployment in 9 months that the SFAB concept, beyond first SFAB, but the SFAB concept is valid and it's effective. it's a small, lightweight organization that can punch way above its weight class. And I think in the future, to go to some of the questions earlier, it'll be a force of choice throughout the world, just because of its, the characteristics of it being able to operate in austere environments with minimal oversight, minimal footprint, with high output. So thank you again for that opportunity to tell our story. Some folks are sticking around to take up any follow-ups, and we'll be happy to answer them in time. So thank you again.
Okay, everybody, thanks so much for coming. We got to get them to their next round of appointments, but we've got Cheryl and Major Wright who will stay back and do some follow-ups. And then feel free to reach out to us, or you also got Major Fontaine, the SFAB Public Affairs Officer. Okay? All right, sir.
Good seeing you, Corey.